at the NH Lingato Congress Hotel, which has now been opened to the public following the conclusion of Bilderberg 2018. Behind the camera, this is Josh Friedman speaking with Charlie Skelton of The Guardian and now a Bilderberg columnist for Newsweek as well.
I'm racking them up.
Yeah, you are. You're conquering the mainstream media. So how you doing at the end of this 2018 Bilderberg conference, Charlie?
I'm good. I'm one Negroni down, so we'll see how that goes. I've had an interesting time. I was thinking to myself, I've not had such a bad time with the police. And then just at the end of the conference had a good old wrestle with a couple of Italian policemen.
What do you mean by a wrestle?
Well, I was trying to take some photographs, and this Turin policewoman came at me, and we had shoved me in the chest, and we were grappling. Her colleague came over, pushing and shoving. They did not want me taking a photograph of the chairman of Goldman Sachs International.
And where was this? This was outside the hotel?
It was outside the hotel. It was after. I mean, people were like, they were like members of the public just walking around. Everything was kind of winding down, but they needed one last shove.
Well, there have been so many stories of harassment of journalists this week. We don't need to get any more into that, but I am very curious to ask you about the relationship between Bilderberg.
Well, hang on. I know. I want to get into it a bit. Just for brief. No, I mean,
go right ahead then.
They ripped the camera from my hands. I mean, during the tussle, and deleted all my photographs and
all of your photographs.
Well, off the camera. I mean,
they wiped the camera
wiped
clean.
The camera clean. I mean, I think I can probably get them back, but I was violated, in a kind of like low-level Italian way. But it was horrible. It was not a nice thing. I was so angry. I was I was just irritated, annoyed, and upset that the Bilderberg Group, which is, full of sophisticates and billionaires and media moguls and journalists, stroke editor types, people like Lily Gruber and Zany Minton-Beddoes of The Economist. The idea that I was outside suddenly just sort of wrestling awkwardly with police. It was just horrible. It was so inappropriate and made me very angry.
Do you think these media elites who are attending the conference condone of this kind of treatment of the press? Do you think they're even aware of it?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, almost certainly not. There must be some kind of a policy. I mean, I know there is from within the organisational centre of Bilderberg, the steering committee, that has a policy of not, only very minimally communicating with people, with a press release a few days before and with a website, that has its kind of stock answers to things. But it's just not really enough, given the seniority of politicians who are there and the number of them, and people like the Secretary General of NATO, 4 prime ministers, 2 deputy prime ministers, etc., etc., etc. It doesn't fit with a situation where the only relationship with the press on the ground is me wrestling with 2 Italian policemen. It's not appropriate, and it doesn't fit with who they are. It doesn't fit with the kind of businesses they do, which, as I said, are often quite media savvy people. I mean, they run media companies. At the moment, my head is kind of in a place of sort of cognitive dissonance where I can't quite square it. Is this their policy? Is their policy simply to spend all of this money on security, and then so many hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of euros on security, and for that to be actually, in practical terms, the only kind of practical effect of that is for me to be wrestling some policemen? I don't understand. That's because there's no threat to them. They walk out the door. They go for a walk in the middle of Turin. They know that there's not actually a threat. There just simply isn't. right?
Well, actually, the Italian police have been raising the term terrorism or terrorist repeatedly in their interactions with the media this week.
I know for a fact that the British police, who, by the way, were amazing in Watford in 2013, I know that they used and leveraged anti-terror laws to control the space, to move traffic around, to move to de-pedestrianise areas, etc., etc. So they were using terror laws against journalists and the occasional activist. And I suspect the same thing's happening here. I think they're leveraging laws which are simply not designed to deal with a guy from The Guardian trying to take a photograph of the former Home Secretary of the UK, Amber Rudd. It's taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
You've been saying that they want the media at arm's length.
Oh, definitely.
Why is that?
Well, they have from the very beginning. It's been the policy from the very beginning. You can see news reports I say news reports, like little bits and pieces in the media from like the 1950s and 60s where they're saying, this thing is happening, but we're not really allowed to report on it, etc. So nothing. It's been suppressed for decades. There was a time where there was a press conference, and you can see footage of that. That you can see Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands talking to journalists. So they got to a point in their history where they were speaking sort of to journalists, and now that's regressed. But interestingly, Henri de Castries spoke to a newspaper. I've forgotten which one. Sorry, I'm tired.
De Castries is the chairman.
Yes, he's the chairman. Sorry, yes. So he's the chairman of Bilderberg. He's also the vice chairman of Nestlé, and he's a board member of HSBC, and he runs the Institut Montaigne, which were instrumental in putting Macron into power. So he runs the Bilderberg steering committee. He's the chairman of that. So he's a powerful guy. He went and spoke to, I think, an Italian newspaper and gave an interview, which I think was done by email, judging by what it sounded like. It wasn't very particularly natural. In fact, it sounded like a sort of cut and paste from the press release kind of stuff that's on the website. The very formal, not entirely accurate sort of blurb that they say about themselves. But anyway, it was certainly a start to see him at least poking his nose above the parapet and interfacing with the media a bit. So, little acorns.
But why is it that they need the media at arm's length?
I honestly, it's stupid of them. It's just plain stupid. They make more trouble for themselves. Trouble, I'm using trouble there in the most softest way. They're giving me something to write about. They're giving other people, they're harassing some journalists, and it causes a little bit of kind of grist for them to write about this thing. I had lots of things flashing through my mind as I was, wrestling, trying to keep hold of my camera, and among various things were, one, I wish I was at the G7 because I'd be drinking free champagne right now as a journalist. Two, what are they doing? This is not a PR strategy, and three, great, I'm going to write about it.
Yeah, it's given, especially these citizen journalists who run around with the cameras trying to ask questions in these ambush interviews, it's giving them a lot of ammunition because they're frequently raising the point, why are you being so secretive? This is given the impression that you do have some nefarious motives.
Yeah, I don't think that the motives are even relevant. As in, who knows what I wouldn't even begin to divine the motives of the steering committee of Bilderberg, say. But what I can say is that the kind of political structure of it is deeply flawed. And to have a thing where you have this many politicians discussing this many important issues in private for so long, with so many people there that their job is to benefit from it. There's investors and people and advisors like Sir John Sawyers runs Macro Advisory Partners. It says on their website that what they do is they leverage the information that he has and the fact that he's so plugged into the system to help their clients and their investors. So you've got a situation where you have public officials and billionaire financiers and investors all in the same room at the same time, talking about whatever. It barely matters whether they're trying to save the world or own the world, and probably it's a bit of both. But the actual process itself doesn't seem to me to fit easily with anyone's basic understanding of kind of representative democracy.
What is your response to the Bilderberg line that they need to have this Chatham House rule and, in a sense, the secrecy in order for them to have frank discussions, as they like to say?
Well, this is an interesting one, and I think it should be properly dismantled, that opinion. Like, I don't actually know what it means. Like, what is the conversation that they might have that they wouldn't say in public? That's so amazing that it's going to somehow solve all the world's problems. Because obviously they're not having that conversation because it doesn't solve the world's problems. So what is this thing that they're allowed to say in private and enabled by this privacy? I'm not talking about radical transparency all the time. Peter Thiel came out in Dresden and spoke to Luke Rudowski and sort of made a statement to that effect, saying, radical transparency is not a thing. I agree. We suffer from radical transparency ourselves as citizens at the moment, or subjects, depending on what country you're in. But so I'm not saying, oh God, we need to have cameras on every conversation in the world. But when politicians and government officials are arriving with staff to a political summit and discussing these topics with so many interested parties, yeah, absolutely. It's not appropriate to have this level of privacy.
Lastly, it seems like
that was absolutely garbled, sort of slightly angry, confused.
Well, having
yes.
had the day you've had, I think you're very well entitled to that opinion.
I don't think that amounted to an opinion, but anyway, go on.
Or a statement of fact.
Yes.
I think we've all, myself included, have had some interesting incidents, if not harassment, this week. Anyway, lastly, it seems like in recent years, year by year, there's a little bit more transparency, even if it's faux transparency, added to this website. So now there's a frequently asked questions section, which I think you've said some of it contradicts itself or contradicts other statements they've made.
Yeah.
They didn't even have the website until recent years. Is there some sort of move toward at least a little more transparency, and why is that? Is that because of the pressure you and Luke Rudowski and Dan Dix and others
and
are
yourself?
putting on?
Yes, no, I think so. I sort of do think that. And I mean, not only that, I'll give you an example. Like, I'll sometimes email the Bilderberg Media Service email address that they've got with, they quite often just spell people's names wrong on the website, or they'll get their job title wrong, or just stuff like that. But also, more importantly, they will have just wrong. They used to have quite a lot more of just factually incorrect statements. Like everyone, the best example is everyone is here in a private capacity, and they realised that simply wasn't true. I spoke to the Treasurer, I remember, in St Moritz, and I said, George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK, is here. In what capacity is he here? And he went, and they eventually, after a day of calls, they said, oh, he's here as Chancellor, and he's coming with Treasury staff. So, then eventually, after writing about that and some conversations in public about that and some emails to them, that gets changed off the website. So, it's kind of, sometimes you feel like you're sort of just encouraging them to behave in an adult fashion and just sort of brush up a bit, and come on, get your facts right, have conversations with the press, don't just set the police on them. Eventually, the weird thing, by the way, is happening at the same time as the G7. So the G7 can manage all of this security, huge security operation, and they can manage 4,000 journalists. And the whole thing doesn't fall over. It's all fine. They have, it's not going to be 4,000 journalists outside Bilderberg, but they could have a system, and I think probably one day will have a system whereby people come along, have your ID, you show who you are, you're from, you get accreditation, blah, 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 blah. You have a little lanyard that they think you're probably less likely to wrestle with a policeman at the end of that process because they know who you are, etc., etc. So, yes, I do think that, they're being nudged, I think, towards that way of being.
Well, I think you're definitely one of the main people doing the nudging, and if that actually comes true, and there is one day where we get accredited, and there's a Bilderberg press corps, an official Bilderberg press corps, then you may very well have been instrumental in making that happen.
Well, I'm happy to nudge.
Any last thoughts on Bilderberg 2018?
Yeah, too many carbohydrates.
we're in Italy. What do you expect?
It's impossible. I mean, yeah, no, it's very carb heavy. So that. Sorry, not very profound.
All right, from the site of Bilderberg 2018 in Turin, Italy, this has been Charlie Skelton. Thank you very much, Charlie. Best of luck to you, and see you next year.
Maybe.
Presumably.
We'll see.
All right, so goodbye.
Okay. Bye.